Hello, everybody. My name is Professor Rich, and today we're talking about grammar, fluency, and how grammar and fluency relate to each other. So, what is fluency, and how is fluency related to grammar, basically? You might think that there is an obvious relationship there. Actually, the relationship is very complex. And lots of people think that they need to learn and practice more grammar in order to increase the fluency of their speech. When I say fluency, I mean not only the speed of speech, but also the accuracy. So can you use the present perfect, or can you use the second conditional while you're speaking in a fluent way? That is, can you use it in conversation fluently without stopping for 5 minutes to plan step by step, word by word, this specific grammar structure of present perfect or second conditional or whatever you're studying? So that's what we're going to look at today. And you can see a little outline of the plan. I'll say a quick hello to the people in chat. Hello, Asmana. Hello, Sleepwalker. Hello to Ranit. And we're going to start by asking a question. Actually, I'm going to start with a clarification. This is something we're going to come back to again and again, which is about these two types of memory in the brain. These are two different types of memory. They're very different types of memory, actually. And I want to start just by mentioning those. So we can separate these two types of memory, more or less, as unconscious habit and conscious recall. So unconscious habit, something you do, and not only you don't think about it to do it, so you don't think about it consciously, but also you can't really think about it consciously. It's something that you do. It's like if I ask you to sing, oh, and then I asked you to think about consciously what actually happens when you do that, like that you, oh, like what actually am I doing exactly? Like some part of my throat is vibrating a certain way, and I open my mouth and make a certain shape with my, like it's really complicated. But you can just do it like, oh, and that's what I mean by unconscious habit. There's a lot of things happening there which are unconscious. Not only do they happen without my intention, but also when I think about it, I realize that I don't really know exactly what I do when I sing. I just sing, right? And actually, if you want to know exactly what you do when you sing, it's quite complicated. You have to think about lots of things, like the amount of force here and the shape of the mouth and the muscles that tense and release and so on. So there's lots of things going on, and we can refer that to the part of memory which we call here unconscious habit. And then on the right side, we have conscious recall, and that's the kind of memory I think we're most familiar with. When I talk to you about memory, or I say, can you remember this, or how's your memory, you probably think mainly of this conscious recall. Like if I say, what did you do yesterday? Or even if I say something like, what's the present perfect? How do you write the present perfect? What's the form of the present perfect in English? If I ask questions like that, you will be access your conscious recall. You consciously think about the answer, and that comes up there. So these are the two types of memory we'll keep coming back to today. And it's worth noting there is no internal transfer between these. they do affect each other, but they affect each other through how they interact with the world. So it's what happens as a result of them which affects each other, but internally they do not transfer. So it's not like if 10,000 times I consciously do some maths puzzles, that memory does not transfer to unconscious habits. However, while I'm consciously doing 10,000 maths puzzles, I might develop some unconscious habits which support that. But that happens as a result of the process. It doesn't happen as an internal transfer of memory. And that's worthwhile knowing. And it has important implications for what we're going to talk about today in terms of learning English. So, enough about memory for the moment. Let's talk about fluency. So, what is fluency? So, here's my little definition of fluency for today. I said, fluency is expressing yourself in speech. Now, I know fluency can be about writing and other things as well, but this is my definition of fluency for today. So, fluency is expressing yourself in speech with speed, with accuracy, and without effort. And when I say effort here, I specifically mean conscious effort. So fluency, we're speaking with speed, that is quite fast, or ideally faster, with accuracy, which means maybe not 100% accuracy, but we want good accuracy. We want speed, we want accuracy, and we want low effort. So low effort, high speed, high accuracy. This is how I'm defining fluency. And this, for example, is the way that I'm speaking now in English, right? I'm speaking quite fast, I'm quite accurate, and I'm not making a lot of effort. I'm not having to think about every grammar structure that I use. I don't have to think a lot about what preposition attaches to which verb and things like that. Instead, it comes out my mouth, quite low effort, quite high speed, quite high accuracy. So we could say that I'm fluent in English. Well, you would hope so, given that I am English and I'm a teacher. I mean, that would suck if I wasn't fluent in English and I was trying to teach you English as well. So that's how I'm defining fluency today. And this is obviously a desirable state. This is something that we want. Right? So let's think of fluency as a skill. We're learning English, and one part of learning English is fluency. And this is something that we want. We want to know how to develop that skill. So I'm going to give you the idea today that fluency is similar to some other skills, some skills that you might know. So some of you may have learned these things, and I'm going to tell you that fluency is like those things in the way that you learn it. Okay? So let me show you my idea. So these are the things that I say are quite similar to fluency. You can look at the pictures and you can maybe mention in the chat what you think those pictures represent. I'll just say a quick hello to Julia Hata, who's joined us, and Free from Cage, who is also here. Hello, how are you doing? So you can see the pictures there. We have dancing, typing, playing football or playing sports, driving or operating some kind of new machine, operating a new machine. This could be any machine, a new microwave, a sewing machine, a machine in a factory, driving, flying a plane, things like that, and playing guitar or playing some other kind of musical instrument. So just look at those things and just think for a moment, how do you think they are similar to fluency? So I think they're similar to fluency in this. With these things, we want to do them with high speed, high accuracy, and low effort. So consider football. If you're a football player or you're playing any sport, when you kick the ball, you don't want it to be like high mental effort. Like you have to think a lot about where exactly to move your foot and what part of the foot I touch the ball with and I balance on my other foot. So if you're thinking about all that and you're making this big mental effort, then obviously it's going to be very difficult to play football, because actually football happens very fast. So you don't have time to make all of this mental effort while you're playing. So we need to be able to kick the ball, like pass the ball to another player without a lot of mental effort. So it needs to be low effort. And then also we want it to be quick and accurate, fast and precise, right? We want our pass to go from our foot to the other player. And we want to do that quite quickly, because if we take a long time to make that pass, then we lose the game because the other team get the ball, right? And you can apply that to any of these, right? Like typing, like when someone doesn't know how to type, they are slow with one finger, or they type but make a lot of mistakes, or they think about it a lot, high effort. So they haven't improved their typing fluency, right? And when someone is good at typing, when they have high typing fluency, what does that look like? So I want to consider specifically typing today. And the reason for that is because, well, we're doing a stream on YouTube. So I think a lot of people who are watching have a computer or a laptop, and you probably know about typing. Like you probably use a computer a little bit. And most of you, I mean, you're typing in the chat now, you know how to type. So you know how to write words. And maybe some of you are quite good at it. Some of you can type quite fast, so you have quite high typing fluency. So I think this is a good analogy for fluency in speaking English. So if we consider that, we consider typing on a computer as fluency. So we're considering like fluency of typing, like fluency of speaking. And hello to Manuel Gordillo, who's just joined us. Let's use our definition from before. Before I defined fluency. And we can use exactly the same definition here for typing. So we can say, typing is putting into the computer words with speed, with accuracy, and without effort, right? Which I will try and demonstrate to you now by typing something in the chat. Now, when I typed that, I put, today we're talking about fluency and how it relates to grammar. And I also said, hey everyone, how's it going? When I typed those things, you can notice the way my mind worked. There wasn't a lot of conscious effort. A lot of what happened was unconscious. The way my hands moved, my fingers, the place I put my hands, a lot of it happened automatically with unconscious. It was unconscious, the unconscious part of the memory that I spoke about before. And it was quite fast and quite accurate. I made some mistakes, actually. And what's interesting, I noticed as well, something I noticed is I made mistakes and I corrected them also without thinking. So it's like I knew when I'd made a mistake and I corrected it automatically. That's quite interesting, isn't it? That's almost like when people speak and they say something and then they kind of correct themselves like that. And they just do it without even really thinking about it. I've never noticed that before, but that's actually not part of our class for today, but I think that's an interesting observation, something to think about. So, let's think about how to learn to type. So how can you learn to type? Let's consider two different ways. So here's two different ways of learning how to type. You can see the pictures. And you can see also the titles. We have studying and doing. Two ways of learning how to type. Studying and doing. And you might already be thinking, how does this relate to learning languages and learning fluency? Is there a relation here? So with learning how to type by studying, we call this type of learning explicit, by the way. So explicit learning is when I tell you or you read the actual information about the thing you're learning. So if I give you some information about typing, like where to put your fingers and how to have your back. So I don't put you in position physically, but I instead tell you, I say, oh, put your shoulders back and have a straight back. And I show you like a diagram and I tell you about it, right? So that's like explicit learning. I'm giving you that information and you are consciously taking that information in. Maybe you're making notes even, and you're consciously thinking about it. And this is explicit. So some of the other things about explicit learning, it is conscious, like I just said. Another thing about explicit learning, it's quick to learn. Learning things explicitly, that is learning by study, is very quick. So I can tell you all kinds of things and you could remember them immediately. Like I could tell you one time something and you remember it forever. That's very quick. It's very quick compared to the other type of learning, that one. So explicit learning is quick, but explicit use, using explicit knowledge, is slow. So studying, and this applies to studying anything, when you compare studying to doing, studying is conscious, quick to learn, and slow for use. Imagine that you read a book about playing guitar. So you could learn lots of things from the book and remember them about guitar very easily, right? So you learn all this stuff and remember it about guitar. But then you pick up a guitar and you need to use those things that you learned. Well, then you're going to be very slow because you'll think, oh, the C chord, oh, it was like this shape. So I need this finger goes here and this finger goes here. And then I do this. And then when that's like that, then I do this, right? So it'd be very slow for you to use that explicit knowledge, that study knowledge. Again, this applies to all study, all knowledge learned explicitly, studying compared to doing. Let's compare doing as learning. Let's think about doing, and that'll help us understand this more. So imagine we learn how to type and we learn by doing. And this is called implicit. So when we learn implicitly, it's unconscious, right? It's unconscious. So if I pick up a guitar, I might make conscious effort. I put my hand in the right place and I do this and I do this. But the learning, the sort of remembering, you might call it muscle memory. Maybe you think of it like muscle memory, right? But like what's happening as you put your fingers on the guitar and you play and then ring, oh, that sounds nice. Oh, that sounds awful, right? Your unconscious system is learning exactly how to put the fingers and how to play the guitar. And it's not learning by you consciously trying to think about it, trying to remember. It's learning unconsciously. The learning is happening without you truly realizing the process. That's what I mean by unconscious. Implicit learning is slow. It's slow. So think about this, like if you read about how to drive a car, it's actually quite simple, you know? Like imagine the steps, how to drive a car. Put the key, turn the engine, hands on the wheel, foot on the clutch, first gear, take your foot slowly off the clutch and press the accelerator. It's quite a kind of simple set of instructions. But when you try to do that the first time, firstly, it's very difficult. But secondly, it takes quite a while to get it, like at least a few hours. And for some people, days or weeks. So it takes quite a long time for this system to really integrate that process, the implicit learning of starting and driving a car. People use phrases like this, right? You need to get a feel for it, right? You need to get the hang of it, get a feel for it, get the hang of it. These kinds of expressions are associated with this implicit learning, this kind of muscle memory, this intuitive type of learning that I'm talking about. By the way, what I'm talking about today is neuroscientific. It's real science. I'm not just making up nonsense from, my own ideas or whatever. This is based on procedural and declarative learning models. And they've studied this and scanned brains, and we know that this really happens. So there really are these two different memory learning systems. And they more or less, not exactly, but more or less, they apply to this dichotomy of studying and doing. So implicit is slow to learn, but quick to use, right? So quick to use. Like when you get to your front door and you put the key in the door and you unlock the door and come in, like how long does it take you to think about how to do that? Like you don't, right? You don't think about it. You just do it. Or even just walking. When you walk, how much do you need to think about when to put your foot forward and when to put pressure on it and when to move your shoulder? Like how much do you need to think about how to walk? You don't need to think about how to walk. You just get up and you walk. It's very quick to use this kind of memory. It just happens. So it's slow to learn, but very quick to use. And another important thing about implicit learning is it needs a lot of repetition and it does need feedback. If we have no feedback of what's good or bad, it can't learn. And if we don't have a lot of repetition, it's very difficult for this system to learn, especially when you have something complex like language, because the rules of language are quite complex. And so we know we're going to need a lot of repetition And that repetition needs to come with feedback. And when I say feedback, I mean, I need the red light or the green light. I need to know, is it good or is it not good? Oh, that one was right. Oh, that one wasn't. Oh, okay. I need this kind of feedback. And that feedback, again, it's quite difficult to fully understand, but that feedback doesn't actually need to be conscious. It just needs to be something that my unconscious system notices. So I don't necessarily need someone to tell me that something is right or not right. And I don't necessarily need corrections, but there does need to be feedback. There needs to be feedback, but I don't need to consciously recognize it. Do you understand? They've done studies where that is the case, by the way, and it's true. It is really true. So there needs to be feedback, but I don't need to consciously recognize it. It's okay if I do consciously recognize it, of course, but I don't need to. There just needs to be some. And I'll talk about later how that relates to a very useful way of improving languages. So let's move on. So if we were considering the first type of learning, explicit, that is learning by study, what would that look like with typing? Well, we'd learn things like this. So we might learn the positions for the fingers. And remember, we're not learning by doing. So we're not actually doing it, but we'll just see like a picture in a book of how to put your fingers on the computer. We'll see some diagrams about posture. We might read about how the special keys are used, how the punctuation on the keyboard's used. We might see a picture of a keyboard that shows the numbers at the top. And we might even read some more advanced stuff like shortcuts. So just imagine reading a book and reading all that information about typing. Now, if you did that, you would know some things about typing. But how much would that help your actual typing skill? In other words, your typing fluency, as we're talking about fluency today. So how much would reading a book about that help? It would help. It would help, wouldn't it? But the question is how much? Just have a think about that. How much would it help, and how would it, in what ways would it help? Now, that is quite important. And I think this analogy, the more I think about it, the more I like it as an analogy. Now, obviously, what would happen if you read a book about studying, but you don't practice? Sorry, you read a book about typing, so you study a book about typing, but you don't practice. Then you get this situation. So this is our guy, and he's learned all about typing by reading a book. But obviously then he comes to the keyboard and has no idea what to do, right? You can apply this to any of the things that we talked about today: playing football, dancing. Has anyone ever read a book about dancing or yoga and then tried to do it? Right? You kind of feel like this guy. It's like, I don't know what to do. And you feel like awkward, and you're trying to like physically do things, right? So let's now take this and apply this to speaking English. So what does that look like when we do that with speaking English? So we go onto some websites, we practice our grammar exercises, we do our Duolingo exercises and things like that. And then we come to use English and we get this situation, right? And the blackboard here is intentional. because this is kind of what goes through your head. You start to do those puzzles, those grammar puzzles that you practiced consciously with study. You start to do those puzzles in your head to try to make the English come out your mouth. And so we get this kind of situation where you feel under a lot of pressure because when you're communicating in English, you don't actually have a lot of time to respond. And so suddenly you have to do those very difficult grammar exercises, which are slow and conscious and need a lot of effort. And you have to do them very quickly because now you have these people waiting to talk to you. And so this is what it looks like when we're studying too much relative to our implicit learning. Of course, one type of implicit learning is practice. Someone in the chat before just said theory without practice, sleepwalker. And I think that is a reasonable approximation of what's going on. Although it doesn't capture the full story, it's a reasonable approximation. Something like theory without practice is the start of what's going on here. If, by the way, you ever feel like you're in this situation, it is likely that you are not doing enough implicit learning. And of course, one way of implicit learning is practice. Because whenever you practice something and you have repetition and feedback, because remember, you need that. So your practice needs to have repetition and feedback. The feedback doesn't need to be conscious, but it does need to exist. There needs to be some positive, negative feedback that at least your unconscious can take in. So we need repetition and feedback in our practice in order for it to be implicit learning. It's not practice without repetition or feedback. We need to have it's absolutely necessary to have repetition and feedback. If you find yourself in this situation, it means you don't do enough implicit learning with repetition and feedback compared to your studying. So let's ask a more general, more useful question about this. How do we improve this part? So we're talking now about the unconscious habit part of the brain. How do we improve that part of the brain? How do we improve our memory about fluency in English? So our English fluency memory, how do we improve that part? Remember, it's unconscious. So anything that we do consciously might affect it, but we can't consciously directly affect it. Of course, what we do know is that it needs repetition, it needs feedback. Positive and negative feedback can be useful, actually, but I put positive feedback here. Positive feedback's more fun, isn't it? Getting a reward for doing something good. Like, you know, when you play guitar, when you learn how to play guitar, the positive feedback is right there because you play the guitar and you get the chord right and ding, and it sounds nice. And that's actually the positive feedback. Anyone who's learned to play a musical instrument might not realize that happening, but it happens unconsciously. And that's why we often, just by practicing on our own with a musical instrument, we often just get better over time because we have that natural positive feedback that the instrument sounds better, and that tells our unconscious how to play the instrument better. So you get that automatically when you're learning how to play a musical instrument. So how do we get that with languages? Well, conversation's a good way. Conversation's a good way. And there's a few things to mention about this. First of all, don't worry consciously about whether you're speaking perfectly or not. We don't need to worry about that, because conversation will automatically, over time, give us feedback on the accuracy of our communication. And the reason for that is, if you say something and it makes sense, then the thing you want will happen. So if you order a coffee and you do it using English that someone can understand, then you'll get a coffee. That's the very oversimplified way of explaining this, which means in the conversation, you will get that positive feedback. And remember, you don't need to consciously notice it. So it could just be the way someone reacts. Like whether you say like, hey, Maria, and she looks over, like that's like positive feedback. That tells me that, yes, her name is Maria, and saying, hey, is a good way to get someone's attention. And that will actually train implicitly my unconscious system that saying, hey, Maria, is a good way to get someone's attention. And then you'll notice that when you say like, hey, Bob, hey, Phil, hey, Manuel, then it gets their attention, and that starts to become very automatic. Often when you're learning another language, these kinds of quick greetings, like the hey, hello, good morning, how are you? I'm good. How are you? These kind of things are the first kinds of language phrases which become automatic. And that's, of course, because we have lots of practice with them and we get lots of repetition and feedback when we do it. So a lot of you in the chat can probably relate to this. Although maybe your second conditionals are not very automatized yet, your greetings, like, hey, how's it going? How are you? I'm fine, thanks. How about you? That kind of stuff probably is, for a lot of you who are watching now, that probably is quite automatic. And really, that is because that's the bit that's had the most repetition and positive feedback. Doesn't have to be conscious, remember, it can be unconscious. Of course, you have to do it, but I mean, the feedback doesn't have to be consciously recognized. So conversation's great for it. What else can we do other than conversation? So there are some techniques that we can use to help this system because of the way this system works. Because this implicit system, unconscious habit system, it's not logical. So it doesn't work in the same way as our conscious system. Our conscious system wants to take like simple pieces and put them together like maths, right? That's what our conscious mind kind of wants to do. But our unconscious mind deals more in patterns. So this unconscious memory, it just looks for like general patterns. So they can be very complicated patterns, but they just need to be a pattern. So it's very good at learning with languages, phrases, flexible phrases. In fact, the thing that I said before was an example of that. When I said, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. How about you? That's a phrase, right? It's like when you say that, if it's automatized in your English, so your level of English, if you have that automatized, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. How are you? It comes out like a phrase. You don't think about the grammar form. You don't think that it's, subject, I plus am, conjugate, I am, I'm fine, that's an adjective. Then we're going to go to question, how about you, question mark. You don't think about that. It just comes out like a phrase, right? And our unconscious mind is very good at dealing with that. And it's also very good at adapting those phrases. So if I later start to say things like, I'm fine, how about you? Oh, and how about your mother? Oh, and how about your brother? And how about your sister? And how about your friend? And how about your wife? And how about your kids? Right? Like, I adapt that phrase quite flexibly because the unconscious system actually, once it realizes that part of that pattern is adaptable, it becomes very good at adapting that phrase, again, without having to think too much about it. Mostly it's an unconscious adaptation that happens. That's the key to fluency. That's really what we want to happen with our spoken English. We want a lot of that, don't we? So learning flexible phrases, actually focusing on using flexible phrases in our language, is a good way of doing that. Another thing we can do to help that is to practice the phrasal pronunciation, because one part of this is this sort of unconscious habitual use is there's a lot of muscle memory involved. And when it comes to languages, that means pronunciation. So we're talking about the mouth, the tongue, the vocal cords, and how they all coordinate together. And that's actually quite complex. So again, thinking about guitar, that would be like the finger position and how we move the hand and all of these kind of things. It's complex and it takes a lot of practice. Now, if we rely on only conversation for practicing all that muscle memory, that's going to be quite difficult. Like if the only natural phrasal pronunciation practice that we have is in conversation, then we're going to have a lot of very difficult conversations. It's like if you want to learn to play guitar, but all of your guitar practice must be done on stage in front of other people. That's not going to be a lot of fun. Can you imagine? You're on stage with the guitar, like trying to learn the muscle position and muscle memory. No. So we need to apply that to languages. Obviously, we're going to need to do some pronunciation practice. So something we can really do to help this process is active phrasal pronunciation practice. So one of the things that I'm saying to you today is take the time that you spend practicing grammar and put that down, and then start to practice more natural phrasal pronunciation instead. Spend some time feeding this muscle memory unconscious learning system. So give your brain a rest, or give your conscious brain a rest, and start to do some physical unconscious learning by practicing phrasal pronunciation. You're training those pronunciation muscles so that it's easier to say those phrases in a natural, fluent way. And then you can go and have some conversations and use those phrases. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we get some positive feedback, which could be conscious or unconscious. It doesn't matter. We get some positive feedback and we realize, hey, these phrases not only sound good, but they mean what I think they mean because the other person is responding, right? And then you start to get the feedback on the meaning. So you've like built yourself a good pronunciation base, and then you go out there and you get the meaning coming in as well. And then the magic starts to work. So what do I mean by these sort of flexible phrases or phrasal pronunciation? I'll talk about that in a second. Let's just go on to the final thing here. So I've said practice like you're practicing a dance. So that's what I'm saying when I say put the grammar book down. I'm not saying to stop. learning grammar, by the way. Don't mean that. And I'm going to talk in a minute about the positive points of grammar. So what can we actually get from grammar learning? But what I mean is just lower your grammar study and increase your practicing phrasal pronunciation. And when you're doing that, it's like you're learning to dance. Like imagine if you wanted to learn how to dance salsa, right? You're going to practice at home. You need to practice the steps, right? Or if you want to learn to play to piano, you need to sit at the piano and do 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 do. Have you ever heard someone who's like a beginner at piano? Right? They do that again and again and again, right? So just take that and do that with your English pronunciation, right? So we're setting that up. So we're going to practice a little bit with some phrasal pronunciation. Okay, now what do I mean by phrasal pronunciation? So we've got something like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do tomorrow? What are you gonna do tomorrow? What are you gonna do tomorrow? Right? So that kind of phrase is what I mean. And I mean practicing it with that natural way of speaking. I'm going to go to the park. I'm not sure. I'm going to go to the park. I'm going to have dinner with my friends. Right? So notice I'm using this of I'm gonna, but then flexibly with different situations. I'm going to go to the park. I'm going to have dinner with my friends. I'm going to read some books. I'm going to practice my English. And we practice that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go there. Okay. And we're focusing like practicing a dance, right? So do that in the same way that you would practice on the keyboard. Do 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 do. I'm going to go to the park. Consider a different grammar structure. So we might think about maybe we want to do the present perfect. Have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? Start with the question. Have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? Oh, I haven't done it yet. I haven't done it yet. Yeah, I've already done it. I've already done it. Notice how I'm saying that, by the way. I'm saying it like fixed phrases. I haven't done it yet. I've already done it. No, I haven't done it yet. Yeah, I've already done it. With the adverb is built in, right? I haven't done it yet. I've already done it. Have you done it yet? So this idea of practicing phrasal pronunciation and practicing the language in those phrases. If you wanted something more complicated, like a second conditional, then you might want to practice a phrase like, if it weren't for that, just practice that. So it's half of a second conditional. And the sound, by the way, the sound is the important bit. I'm going to write the words in a minute, but the sound's the important bit. The sound is, if it weren't for that, right? The words are that. If it weren't for that. And then we'd need to know how to use that. So you use this phrase by saying something like this. So that's the pattern. And we could logically and consciously look at that pattern and talk about it. But the important thing really is that our unconscious starts to recognize that pattern. The way the pattern actually comes out in speech is something like this. something like that. I've got to work tomorrow. If it weren't for that, I'd come to your party. So this is a pattern for a second conditional, just to give you an example of something a bit more advanced than the I'm gonna and the present perfect examples that I gave before. Right? So if it weren't for that, Y would Z. If it weren't for that, I'd come. If it weren't for that, I'd have loads of money, etc., etc. Now, if you want more information about how to recognize those kinds of patterns in English, I have other streams on it. So if you just look at the live streams that we've done in the past and specifically look for the ones on phrasal vocabulary or lexical approach, things like that, I've talked about this tons. So it's the kind of thing I always look for, useful, flexible phrases in English. And these are the kind of things that you should be practicing like you're practicing dancing at home in order to train that muscle memory so that when you're in a conversation, you can say them like a dance, right? And then when you do that with lots of repetition and positive feedback, then your implicit learning system, the unconscious system, will start to learn really how the patterns fit into the meaning as well. This practicing the do, that just, all that does, that just trains our pronunciation and how we sound. In order to know if our song on piano is actually a good song, we need to play with an audience and we need to get some feedback from them. So do we get a round of applause or we don't? And that's when we start to train in language terms. That's how we start to train the meaning side of this. So moving back onto grammar then. So what I've told you so far doesn't involve a lot of conscious grammar. So then the idea is, how does conscious grammar come into it? Like, is there a point to learning grammar for a language? And if so, what is that point? Well, yes. There are many reasons to learn grammar in English. First and foremost is actually constructing your phrases. So, like, when you are writing your useful English phrases, which you're going to practice like a dance, you need to actually have some grammar knowledge in order to write them correctly. Like, if I'm a student and I'm constructing myself a useful phrase to learn, such as this, then I need to actually know the second conditional to be able to write that phrase. Obviously, this doesn't apply if you have a teacher to write the phrases for you. Like I wrote this phrase for you, but ideally you want to choose and make your own phrases to learn. So you want to choose and make useful phrases. And you need to understand what parts fit where, right? Like, I need to know that here I need a noun and here I need a verb, right? I didn't actually tell you that before, but in order to use that correctly, I need to know that that's a noun. I need to know that that's a verb, right? And in fact, that's a verb in the infinitive form. So Y is a noun and Z is a verb in the infinitive form. I need to know that. That's grammar. And so in order to know and understand that, I do need to have some grammar knowledge. So that's one use for grammar, right? Grammar, you need good grammar to be able to construct your phrases to learn. Another use for grammar is preparing your speech or preparing what you're going to say beforehand. So before you're going into a conversation, you might think a little bit consciously about the things you're going to say. When you're in the conversation, you want to say them naturally as phrases. But before you go into the conversation, you might think about exactly what the tenses are and how to fit them together. So it's useful for that. Obviously, useful for writing as well. Although these days you can ask for help from ChatGPT, you can use Microsoft Word for correction, you can use Grammarly, things like that. But still, grammar is very useful for writing. Consciously studied grammar is useful for writing. When I'm writing, if I'm writing an academic paper, then I often need to consciously think about the grammar that I'm going to use in different parts. And sometimes I even have a look at a reference to see what's exactly the correct thing to do. Because there are some things where, it's not very clear what the correct thing to do is. One such example is with something like when we use however, like, are we going to use it like that, or are we going to use it with the semicolon like that? So do we use it to start the new sentence, or do we use it like that with a semicolon to separate it? And then instead of starting a new sentence, we have an independent clause. It's quite a complicated grammar question. And it's the kind of thing that when I'm writing something, I might think, maybe I'll just check a reference on that and see what the best option would be here. So conscious grammar has those uses. It does also enable slow but correct speaking. Now, that can be useful, but remember that the topic for today, the objective for today is fluency. And slow but correct speaking is not fluency because of the slowness. So, of course, we need to consider that, but it does help with that. In fact, it enables it. Like if you learn a lot of grammar, then you will learn how to say lots of things correctly, but slowly. And then we get onto some other areas. So we've got checking what's correct. So if you see some English, someone says something and you want to understand if that's correct, obviously conscious grammar knowledge can help you with that. Also, fun. Learning grammar can be fun. And some people really enjoy learning grammar, talking about grammar. And some people are really good at grammar. So, and that's good because grammar is related to English. And of course, any fun you can get from learning languages will help you to improve your language. Then we get to the final thing. And the final thing is the point that's really important for fluency. Actually, the first thing is also really important for fluency. And the last thing, which I'm going to tell you now, the last thing is monitoring. What do you think monitoring is? Or what do you think by saying monitoring here? What do you think I'm talking about? By the way, may I say hello to the channel member Umut? How are you going? I can speak a language fluently, but not English. You mean you can speak another second language fluently? So not your native language, but another language, but it's not English. Hello to Eunice. How are you doing? And Free from Cage says, initially grammar was punishment for me, but now it's really fun. Free from Cage also says how to make confidence level up while speaking. Confidence is a really tricky one. So to some extent, as your English gets better, you get more confident. But also confidence, like social confidence, is really dependent on a lot of factors. How you're feeling, your personality, how old you are. Like, as a general rule, as people get older, they get more confident socially. So I don't know how old you are, Free from Cage, but if you're like 25 or younger, then you can assume that your confidence will increase as you get older. In fact, it just keeps increasing. As Manuel can testify, the older you get, the more social confidence you get. So this is what I mean by monitoring. So monitoring is this idea that as we're doing something which relies a lot on unconscious, automatic kind of muscle responses, we have a conscious monitoring of it. And you could do the same thing with all the other skills I talked about, like dancing, playing guitar, things like that, right? You just let it happen just naturally. Don't overthink it, right? And we can do this with speaking as well. It's a little bit more unusual with speaking because we're often very consciously involved in conversation. And sometimes we get involved in the wrong ways. The point is that you don't want to interfere too much, but just kind of pay a bit of attention to what you're saying, to the extent that you're just thinking a little bit about what comes out your mouth. And the idea here is that you're providing your own feedback. So you are the one who's providing yourself with positive or negative feedback based on your unconscious system. This is like playing piano and listening to what you're playing as you play it. So like I said before, when you're learning a musical instrument, as you practice and practice, it starts to sound better. And that provides you the positive feedback because you're listening to what you're playing. And this is basically the same thing as that, but for conversation. So you're in a conversation, you speak naturally, and you listen to yourself while you're speaking. Ideally, we listen to ourselves in the moment while we're speaking. And by the way, Emilio Lopez says, greetings from Panama. Interesting class as everything you do. Thank you, Emilio. How are you doing? So listen to yourself while you're speaking. Pay a bit of attention to it. If your conscious grammar is sufficient, that will provide you the feedback you need. So you will start to notice yourself when you naturally use certain phrases correctly, which maybe in the past you hadn't. And that noticing will give you some positive feedback because you'll be able to feel good about that, to say, oh, I just used the second conditional without thinking. Positive feedback. And that positive feedback helps to inform that unconscious habit learning system, telling it that, yes, you got the pattern correct. So do that again. Just like if you're playing guitar and listening to yourself, or if you're singing. So there's something a lot of people now, when they learn to sing, they get a microphone like this and they have something called monitoring, which I'm using right now, which is where you can hear what your microphone is recording. You can hear it in your ears. So you can really hear yourself very well. It's quite different than just speaking to yourself because you can actually hear what's coming through the microphone in your headphones. And a lot of people, when they learn singing now, they use this technique because you can really hear like whether your singing sounds good and you can hear the qualities of your singing. So it helps to provide that feedback. So it's just like that. That's the idea, that you're monitoring, and that monitoring is there to help provide that feedback to yourself, to your unconscious system, about how it is unconsciously using and making sense of the language. And that will improve your fluency. Just do bear in mind, we do need a lot of repetition, and it does learn slow. So the unconscious system learns slow. And this is also another argument that we can make for studying grammar, that realistically, maybe you just don't have the quantity of time right now that you need to train your unconscious system to speak fluently. And so until then, the slow but correct conscious system can help to bridge the gap, because that system, the conscious system, learns very quickly and it enables you to say a lot of things. It will be slow and frustrating and take effort, but it's better than saying nothing. So there is this idea that explicit study can help to bridge the gap while our implicit system learns. So that brings us pretty much to the end of our class for today. I hope you've enjoyed it, folks. Please do like the video and subscribe if you'd like to see more. My like and subscribe button doesn't seem to be working today. What's going on? Normally it explodes. Let's try that again. Oh, there you go. It's working here. I don't know why it's not working on the other screen. So smash that like button and hit subscribe. Why isn't it working here? Ah, there it is. All right, and if you want to take classes with me, now is a reasonable time to do that. You can send me an email at professorrich@gmail.com. The email is currently on the screen. So do go ahead and contact me if you would like some customized private English classes. And you can, of course, download the notes from today. The link to download the notes from today's class is now on the screen and in the chat. And in just a moment, it will be available down below the video. Which brings us to question time. So if you have any questions right now about today's class or about learning English in general, you can ask those questions now and I will do my best to answer them. I'm just going to grab a coffee while you guys think about that. So think about your questions, type them in the chat, and I'll be back in a moment to answer those questions. Hello, everybody. I'm back. And thank you very much, Mr. Umut Gok, supporter of the channel, with 44 44 Turkish lira. Cool. Ah, you're Turkish. I have a few Turkish students, actually, Umut. Are you living in Turkey? I have some Turkish students living here in the UK, and they all want to go back to Turkey. They're teenagers. They hate it here in the UK. They really hate it. They want to go back to Turkey. But their parents want to live in the UK, so they're in the UK. All right, let's have a look what we got here then. Oh, thank you very much. Also, Manuel Gorrillo with those 5,000 Spanish doubloons straight from the Caribbean, plundered from the grave of Cortez. Thank you very much, Manuel. I always do enjoy your coffees. Cheers. What's the difference in using these adverbs, therefore, hence, and consequently? So, they're basically all the same thing, to be perfectly honest. Therefore is the most common, the most general, and the one that you will use the most. And then consequently is probably like second, and then hence probably a little bit rarer. Hence perhaps sounds what does it sound? A little dated, to be honest, a little bit old-fashioned, but you can still use it in very formal and academic contexts. Other than that, the use is identical, so they are all adverbial discourse markers to indicate a consequence. Result? Could we say result? Logical result, which we could also call a consequence. Therefore is by far the most common. And actually, if I were writing an academic essay, I would definitely, if I like wrote the essay and I used consequently 5 times and therefore once, then I would definitely wonder about that. Like, am I sure I want to use consequently 5 times and therefore once? By the way, as a general rule for me, if I'm writing an essay, this is kind of a separate subject, but it'll help you to think about when you want to use synonyms in your writing. So as a general rule, if I'm writing a 2,500 word essay, this is what I want to make it clear that this is just what I do myself. And I have no rationale for this other than my own personal sort of writing style. So this is by no means what you have to do. It's just what I do. So this is like Richard's like personal writing rules, right? So for a 2,500 word essay, I will try to use a particular phrase no more than 3 times. In particular, this applies to discourse markers, etc. So obviously, if you're writing an essay about grammar, then you will use the word grammar like 25 times, right? And that is unavoidable because the essay is about grammar. But the point I'm making is when it comes to words like therefore and other terms that we might use a lot in an academic essay, so therefore, however, in addition, right? These kind of terms. Therefore gives the consequence, however gives a contradiction or gives a some contrasting information, and in addition, which adds something to the previous sentence. I will try not to use any of those more than 3 times. And if I have used them more than 3 times, then I will use the synonyms, right? So with therefore, you've got, as you mentioned, you've got consequently. You have so. You have as a result. Okay. Stuff like that. For however, you've got on the other hand, nonetheless. For in addition, you've got additionally, moreover, furthermore. Okay. And when I'm doing the final stages of my edit of an essay, I will actually do a word search for these terms. And if they come up more than 3 times, then I will go through and change them to synonyms. And that's it's just a question of writing style. It just makes your writing more varied. That's for a 2,500 word essay. So obviously, if we want to change this and say, oh, what if it's a 6,000 word essay? What about a 6,000 word essay? Well, obviously, then it's not going to be 3 times anymore, but it will be more like 5 times. Something like that. And that's something that's really easy to do with discourse markers. You should actually apply it to other things as well. Good writing, in good writing, we don't overuse a singular term unless we're deliberately doing it, obviously. Okay. Hope that helps. Okay, moving on. Zoya, does the teacher's performance play a major or minor role in the learning? What teaching prevents learning? My opinion on this has changed a lot, actually. So when I started teaching, I was very much of the opinion that the teacher was really important. And I thought that a good teacher was like a magician, you know? And I believed that I could kind of go into a class and, you know, if my students wanted to be the next president of the United States, then I could make it happen for them. Like, that was my belief when I started teaching. Then I went completely to the other side, mainly because of teacher training courses and books about teaching that I read. And I completely flipped to the opinion that it's all about the student and the teacher basically can't do anything. The student is completely in control of their own destiny. And although part of being a good student means you get yourself a good teacher, however, a good teacher cannot make a good student. There's only one person who can make someone a good student, and that's you. So that was my opinion for a long time. And just recently, I've started to come back a little bit with that, as we do with everything, and come to a more kind of middle position. The real answer to this, Zoya, is very complicated, as it is with everything. You know, interestingly enough, one of the things that's brought me back to a middle position is AI. Because I'm someone who uses AI a lot, and I like it, and I'm quite familiar with using it. However, I am very much of the opinion that AI will not replace teachers. And that's not out of a sense of preservation, not that I'm aware of anyway, because actually, if someone told me, forget it, you can't be a teacher anymore, it's over, I don't think I would have a massive problem accepting that. I love teaching, I enjoy it, but it is possible, in fact, quite likely, that I would have a better quality of life doing something else. And so there are advantages to that. However, I do feel a calling to be a teacher. And as long as there is not a replacement, then there's a space for me to go. And so I will be a teacher. So I don't think it's a lot out of self-preservation, but I have come to the conclusion through my experiments with AI and my experiments of getting students to use AI, I've come to the conclusion that there is something quite special about having a teacher. And it's irreplaceable. And I think it actually comes to not only about the teacher-student relationship, but also I think it's about human-to-human relationship. And I think I have taken, without realizing it, I think I've taken a philosophical position on the idea of human-to-human interaction versus human to non-human. I think there's something special about human-to-human interaction, basically. And I think it applies not only to student-teacher, but to any human-to-human interaction, which can also be human to human via like art to human, right? So with a teacher, it's like teacher via like teaching to student. So I interact with my students by teaching. That's like my interaction. And some humans, let's say artists, in fact, interact via art to, you know, consumers of art, right? And I think what all this comes down to is that like two or more humans interacting in a meaningful way is what we call human communication. And I think there's something very special about human communication for us as humans. I think it is a fundamental part of many aspects of our life, including learning. And so, if you take the communication out of learning, I think you irretrievably lose something. So if you entirely self-study, something is lost that is a big thing. And I think that will negatively impact your ability to learn. And actually, I think you can apply that to many things. Like art. Take the human out of the art. Just make AI art. And then humans look at that. I think there's something missing there. And no matter how good that AI art gets, there's always going to be something missing. You can see that my philosophy here is not fully developed. But you can see I have some inclination towards an idea on the subject. So this conversation has gone all the way into the Platonic realms. Like we are upstairs in the philosophical ivory tower, currently having metaphorical breakfast with Plato and Socrates. So let's take it down to earth. Down to earth, yes. Yes, most of the time, the teacher's role is extremely important for the student. That's not to say that you can't learn with a bad teacher, but a bad teacher would make problems for sure. Learning with a good teacher, that's great. Now, let's think about what about learning with an amazing teacher? Like, just imagine like the perfect teacher who is incredibly interesting, intelligent, extremely good at seeing where you are and what you need to get you to the next level. And they just have this ability to engage your learning and bring you up to that next level. And we have all of the complexities of a human-to-human interaction, communication going on as well. I mean, that is going to be a powerful situation for the learner. And I've been in that situation as a learner. I've had inspirational teachers, and I've had classes and seminars where there has been an inspirational teacher or teacher figure involved. And it's very beneficial for your learning. Things stick in your head. Like, you can remember the classes and the discussions you had and the interesting answers that they gave and just the whole interaction. It sticks in your head. So taking the teacher out of that equation potentially could be a great loss. However, let's be honest, amazing teachers are rare, very rare. And by the way, I am not claiming to be an amazing teacher. I don't think I am an amazing teacher, to be honest with you. I'm good, okay? I'm good. I've been doing it for 16 years, so I think at 16 years you should be a good teacher, right? That would suck if you've been teaching for 16 years and you're not good. But I don't think I'm amazing. Maybe for some individual students I have been, I don't know. It's something to aspire for. And maybe as a teacher, you should always try to aspire to be a better teacher anyway. Anyway, I think just the fact that we're having this conversation and there's so much interesting phenomena to consider when having this discussion gives us the answer about the importance of teachers. Now, the next thing you asked, Zoya, is you said, what teaching prevents learning? I don't know if any, I think prevent is the wrong word here. But what if, because I don't think any kind of teaching can actually prevent learning unless it's like a teacher with a gun to your head forcing you to do the wrong thing. Like that might prevent learning. But I think the bigger danger in, at least in the West, in the modern West, is teaching which impedes learning. Now, when we say it impedes learning, that's basically a nice way of saying it damages the learning. So, in other words, the teacher is doing more harm than good. Not preventing, like learning will still happen, but having the teacher there actually causes more damage than doing good. As in, the students could learn more on their own than with the teacher. Okay. Obviously, that's something which does happen. I mean, again, talking about myself, I might have a bad day, and that might happen to me, right? But it definitely happens. It definitely happens. I mean, let's be honest. Do I want to go here? Let's see. Should we do this? Is this a good idea or not? We could, like, quickly react to a YouTuber. And I might be able to give you an example of a teacher impeding learning. Now, I'm not going to react right now because I'm not prepared, but what I'll do is I will give you an example in language learning, right? I can give you several examples. So in the context of language learning, what could a teacher do to impede students' learning? Well, there's quite a lot of things actually that a teacher could do. Quite a lot. I think, wow, there's a lot of things. It's making me a bit paranoid about teaching, actually. Point them in the wrong direction. Give the wrong strategy. Discourage useful strategies. So I see all of these things all the time, by the way. Like, I see teachers doing this all the time. And probably I do this sometimes because we're not perfect, right? I made that video 3 years ago saying teachers are not gods. Like, we're not God. We make mistakes. So sometimes I will do this without knowing it. Like, I'll say something that I think is right and it turns out to be wrong. That could happen. Could happen to anyone. But I definitely, obviously, I see this happening with other teachers. And we see it on YouTube all the time. One of the biggest IELTS channels out there, there's a massive IELTS channel, and the guy streams like 3 or 4 times a week. And he released a video a few weeks ago saying that, right, let's just type it. I think the video was something like advice for IELTS speaking part 1. And he said the first point, or like the second point, one of the main points was speak in full sentences. This guy has been on YouTube for like 10 years doing IELTS streams. He's one of the biggest IELTS streamers. I think maybe the biggest IELTS streamer, right? And he said that in his advice for IELTS speaking part 1. He said, speak in full sentences. That is wrong. In my opinion, and in as far as I understand, in the opinion of like IELTS as well. And it's wrong. It's wrong on many levels. Okay. Okay, number 1, why it's wrong. The IELTS marking criteria does not mention sentences. And there's a good reason for that. Natural speech does not consist of sentence after sentence. In fact, when you see like a script of someone having a conversation, we don't normally refer to the parts as sentences. We call them utterances. And the reason we call them utterances is that they're not necessarily a sentence. Like when we speak, we don't necessarily speak in sentences. A sentence is subject plus predicate, right? With a capital letter and a full stop. But when we're speaking, we don't necessarily say that. Look at what I just said then, right? I just said, but when we're speaking. I started my utterance with but. I started my utterance with but. So what does that mean? Well, but is supposed to be, what's but? It's a coordinating conjunction, right? So how can you start a sentence with but or and if they're coordinating conjunctions? You can't start a sentence with but I just did it. Because I'm speaking. Do you know why I can do that when I'm speaking? It's because when we speak, we don't speak in sentences. So giving someone the advice to speak in full sentences, in my opinion, impedes learning. It's damaging because you're asking the student to focus on a structure of subject plus predicate when speaking. And not only is that wrong because people don't speak in sentences, and it's also wrong because the IELTS marking criteria doesn't mention sentences for the speaking exam. And by the way, the reason why it doesn't is because IELTS know this because the people who write IELTS are really, really, really qualified linguists who study natural language and they know all about this stuff. So they would not make the mistake of writing the word sentence in their marking criteria, right? So not only is it wrong because we don't do it, and also because it's not in the marking criteria, but also it puts the student's focus in totally the wrong place. Focusing on speaking in full sentences is the wrong strategy. It's exactly what's going to make you sound like a robot. Your English will not sound fluent and natural and high level if you're going in and you start focusing on making full sentences in your IELTS speaking exam. It's a damaging piece of advice. That's my opinion. I'm just giving an example here of, well, a few things. One, how teachers can have different perspectives, but also, in my opinion, how teachers' advice can impede learners. So I'll put number 3 here. Your focus should be on natural, fluent speech with some complex structures and some sophisticated vocabulary. Do you notice the terms that I use there? I didn't say full sentences. I said natural, fluent speech, complex structures, and sophisticated vocabulary. That's what you want to focus on when you do an IELTS speaking exam. Please, do not focus on speaking in full sentences. All right? So I hope you've got the idea there of what I'm trying to say. And I just found it really amazing that someone with apparently so much experience of training, I mean, far more experience than me, I think, actually. So maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. But maybe I am wrong. Someone who's got so much experience of training people to do IELTS is giving them this rigid, structure-based advice, which, in my opinion, is damaging and is wrong. I have worked as a speaking examiner for Cambridge English, and I know from my experience as a speaking examiner and also my experience as a teacher and as a linguist that telling someone that they need to speak in full sentences is bad advice. Okay, rant over. What teaching prevents learning? There you go. Doesn't prevent learning, Zoya, but it's some teaching advice that can impede it. All right. Next question. Manuel says time for the toilet. Yeah. Oh, that was when I went on the break before. Free from Cage says, I was hired. I got hired. I was got hired. Which one is correct? Well, I was hired is the kind of more formal passive. This is the formal passive, isn't it? So this would be the passive of they hired me. I was hired. So that's the formal passive. But honestly, in speaking, it would be a lot more common to say, I got hired. I got hired, which means something like there was hiring, which happened to me as a complete process. That's how we use this kind of get thing. It's that something happened to completion. I got hired. My house got painted. I got hired. In speaking, this is way more common. In casual speaking. That's not necessarily the case for all contexts. So it does depend on the context. If you were speaking about certain things like academic things or business things, then you might see more of the formal passive. But in just colloquial, everyday speech, everyday topics, then you're more likely to see that one. And as for the last one, I got hired, that's incorrect. Free from cage. You can't use that. That's overuse. By the way, there's an important point to make here, that one of the reasons why these things are so similar here is because it's past simple. And with past simple, you're talking about a completed process. Now, if we put these into, let's say, what's a good example here? Let me give an example like this. Tomorrow, no, I don't want to make it too complicated. Soon, I'll start, and then let's use examples with be and get, where we can say being happy, getting happy. And I do think it's worthwhile pointing out that there is a difference here, which is also present in your example. However, because it's the past simple and it's completed, then it doesn't make any difference in that case. But here, it does. So soon I'll start being happy versus getting happy. There is actually a difference in meaning here. Where in this case, be happy means the state of being happy, whereas get happy means the process of reaching the state of happy, right? So it's worthwhile knowing that if you say something like soon I'll start being happy, you're referring to that you will start immediately and then go into the state and I'm going to be happy. Whereas start getting happy implies that you will start the process and that process will lead you to being happy. So there is a difference. It just didn't quite... You just can't see that difference when it's like that. By the way, I know that's not a passive. However, it does still apply. Although it's difficult to think of a passive example where it does apply, to be honest. Anyway, worthwhile noticing the be-get dichotomy and meaning there. Next question. Anwar, let's say you work the graveyard shift at a convenience store. When would you say good morning to your customers? Whenever. Just don't overcomplicate it, Anwar. Everyone disagrees on this. Just whatever. I mean, for me personally, yeah, it's good morning is what I say like after I've slept. So probably like 6 a.m. is probably a good time. Seem a bit weird to say good morning at 2. But, you know, you could, especially as a joke, you know. But when it comes to this good morning and when do we say afternoon and when do we say evening and all the rest of it, don't overcomplicate it. Everyone has their own little perspective on this. So, whatever. You know, it's like saying if you eat a meal at 4:30, is it lunch or dinner? Oh. If you eat 3 sausages, 2 pieces of bacon, 2 eggs, and some toast at 11:15 in the morning, is it breakfast or lunch? And we won't say brunch because that's American. The point I'm making is don't get tied up with these things. Just whatever. I'm having breakfast. Breakfast? Really? 11:30? Yeah, I haven't eaten yet. It's my breakfast. It's lunchtime. Okay, yeah, but I'm having breakfast. Whatever, you know? It's not a linguistic question, really. It's just whatever. And, you know, you get it all the time where it's like 12:30 and someone says good morning, you know? Like, how can you say good morning when it's 12:30 p.m.? Good morning. Actually, it's the afternoon, actually. Yeah, I know. People do it all the time. No big deal. We're trying to put boundaries on things which don't actually have boundaries, aren't we? You know? All right. Manuel says, I'm inclined to believe that the teacher's method is absolutely the key point. So Manuel's all about the teacher. Fair enough. Sahil says, I know almost all the English tense rules, but I still can't make full sentences like native speakers. What should I do? Do what I said in the lesson today, Sahil. So if you came late to the stream, then watch it again. Go back to the start. And you want to do less grammar study and more of the other things I spoke about, including phrasal practice, learning flexible phrases, positive feedback and repetition, communication, and things like that. You need to build fluency. Less effort into grammar study. More effort into dance practice. You're learning English like you're practicing dance. That's what I'm telling you to do. Can we use them interchangeably in all cases? Oh, I don't know what we're talking about, Sleepwalker. Sorry. Flovey, hello there, says, I had a question about what are the best way to teach small children English from the ages of 2 to 12. Oh, well. Aren't you lucky? Because I have a very popular stream on this. And if I remember rightly, I think you were there. So I think you've seen it. Let me get the link. That one. It would actually be quite different what you do at 2 and what you do at 12, by the way. It's quite a big difference. But okay, the summary is at 2 you want no focus on grammar or structure. All about copying, repetition, games, modeling, etc. So that would be at 2 years old. We're gonna go to the park. We're gonna go to the park. Ha 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 ha. Right, 2 years old. 2 years old is probably more like clap your hands, clap your hands. Okay, get a bit older to 6 years old, and then we're doing the kind of chants, aren't they? We're gonna go to the park. Where are you gonna go? You're gonna go to the park. Ah, you're gonna go to the park? Yeah, I'm gonna go to the park. Oh, okay. Right. Watch some Shaun the Sheep. 6 years old. Go up to 12 years old, and then we start to bring in some analysis. We start to think a bit more about form. Do we know what is a verb? Do we know where to put it? Talk a bit more about the grammar and so on. Because our brains change. The way we learn changes, and what's useful changes. Watch the stream. Are you from the region where the actress Jessica Barden is from? Jessica what? Jessica Barden is an English actress. That I've never heard of. Oh, yeah. Alia, you're kind of right. So, Jessica Barden is from Yorkshire. She's from Yorkshire up north. So she speaks a little bit like that. No, I did that wrong. Yorkshire up north. So she speaks a little bit like that. Is that right? Like? Do they say like? Yorkshire. Up in Yorkshire. Up in Yorkshire, how do they say speak? We speak like this. No, I can't do the next bit. I can do Yorkshire. It's right good in Yorkshire. Yeah, so she's from Yorkshire, that's the northeast. I'm actually originally from the northwest, but we are from the north. So yeah, there is some similarity. No teacher can reach Teacher Rich. Well, I don't know about that. Thank you, though, Umut. Free from Cage says, in my opinion, AI can't take the place of teachers. My teacher gives me something valuable, and I'm proud of myself as a good and compassionate human being. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I was talking about. Pilavi says, where are your sleepy cats? They're around. Sahil says, I know almost all the English tense rules, but I still can't make full sentences like native speakers. What should I do? I think I already answered that, didn't I? Umot says, our English teacher Bilal said a teacher fascinated learning, not learned. Our English teacher Bilal said a teacher, do you mean facilitated? Like teachers facilitate learning rather than teaching. Something like that. Pallavi says, I need a piece of advice on how to stop using AI for my homework assignments. You don't need to stop using AI. Just bear in mind that what AI gives you is rubbish. So you can use AI like a research assistant, but you still need to do the assignment yourself. You do the assignment. Don't give the assignment to the AI. That'll be a really terrible assignment. In this day and age, it seems hard to find a teacher who is both ingenious and truly inspiring. Well, I think when you say in this day and age, Anna, I think it's always like that, isn't it? Like, is there any day and age when you can find all these inspiring, ingenious teachers? I think that now people think about social interaction only between people as the right way, but in the future, many AI devices can become independent participants in the social space. If we ever have a period when AI operates as a conscious entity at the same level as a human, but I'm not sure that will happen because first of all, we need to get there. So before we get there. But then when we get there, they might just go straight past. And if they go straight past, then it's not human to human communication. It's like then we're communicating with like super conscious intelligence thing. And that's not the same, you know? Because then our communication will be like my cats communicating with me, you know? And although that is meaningful for my cats, I think the most meaningful communication is cat to cat. Like they are much more engaged in cat to cat communication. So, I don't know. But maybe. We'll see. So Free from Cage says, I got lost. People say this all the time. Now it's passive. You could analyze it as the passive, the phrase I got lost. However, you don't need to. There's a simpler analysis, which is just to say that get means become and lost is an adjective. And so I got lost means I become lost, which is just the phrase I become plus adjective. It's not even become, is it? Sorry, it's became in the past, like that. So you don't need to analyze that as a passive. But anyway, this way of thinking about things is not necessary in the first place. We're being too grammatical about it. You have a phrase, I got lost. That's useful. Use it like that. I got lost. I'm getting hungry. Don't try to consciously over-categorize things. I think that's one of the lessons I wanted people to take away for today. We don't need to consciously grammatically categorize everything. Alex says, hi, Rich. I'm curious about the origin of two words of berries. Raspberry and cranberry. Do they have a relation to rasp and cran? I doubt it. I doubt it. And by the way, I don't know. I need to check. But I would imagine that it's totally random. But maybe not. Let's find out. So rasp comes from a type of wine. Raspis, which means a sweet pinkish wine. So I guess they made wine from raspberries. And cran comes from the German Kranich, meaning crane. And they called it craneberry because the flower looked like the bird, which was the crane. The crane, but this crane is a bird with a long neck. So it looks like that. So they called it craneberry because it looks like a crane. So you see, it's essentially random. As with many names. It's interesting though, isn't it? By the way, if anyone is actually interested in that area of kind of words, it's called etymology. Etymology. So, etymology is the study of the history of words, and etymology can be useful because it exposes the morphemes in the words, and learning about the morphemes or graphemes of words helps you to understand vocabulary you've never learned before. Because you start to break down, you start to see the parts of the word and assign meaning to them, and it helps you with others. I've given millions of examples of that in the past. I would recommend, by the way, spending more time on that and less time on grammar rules. Spend more time looking at the morphology of vocabulary. Do you know why? Oh, I've got a rationale. I have a rationale for this, folks. Vocabulary must be learnt consciously. So remember right at the start of the class when I said this, well, with grammar, we can get it over here and we want it over here on the unconscious habit side so that we're fluent. But with vocabulary, you've got no choice. You've got to learn it over here on the conscious recall. So studying vocabulary consciously is a damn good thing to do. So get onto that etymology. Look at your morphology. Get your vocabulary book. Study it. Learn some new words. Learn some phrases, even better. And do it actively. There's evidence for this, by the way. I'm not just saying it. And it's not only from my teaching experience. It's from studies of particularly the particular studies that come to mind. They involve language tests with lexical violations, that means vocabulary that's incorrect, and syntactic violations, that means grammar which is incorrect. And what we see by using measures of electrical activity in the brain, we can see that with the lexical violations, you always consistently get a negative potential in the part of the brain associated with conscious memory. However, with the syntactic violations, that means the grammar, when you see something and you see it's grammatically wrong, with native speakers and with experienced non-natives, the activation is in the unconscious memory, but with newer and lower level learners, the activation is in the conscious memory. If you didn't understand that, it doesn't matter. I'm only telling you to prove to you that there is scientific evidence for it, and lots of it. So vocabulary has to be consciously learned. We cannot detect if the right word is being used unconsciously. It needs to be conscious for us to know if the word is right or not. Which means vocabulary knowledge must be conscious, which means we need to learn it in the conscious system, which means that when we learn vocabulary, we have to actually study it. We can't just magically absorb it. Isn't it funny how like the kind of myth about language learning is that you learn vocabulary without study, but you have to study grammar? And actually, it's the other way around. You learn grammar without study, but you have to study vocabulary. That's what actually happens. Anyway, okay. I'm just ranting. I got a pattern maker job in the apparel company. That's not a passive at all. We're just using the colloquial get there to mean acquired. Whenever if you use get, that doesn't naturally mean that it makes a passive, right? Get is a very flexible word which can mean many, many, many things. And one of the first videos I ever did on YouTube is on this. One of the first videos I ever did on YouTube. This one. I think I already reacted to this, didn't I? I seem to remember that I did.
Hello, it's Rich, the English teacher, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about the uses of the word get in English. This is a lesson for B2 or upper intermediate students. If you learn this one word, you can learn all these other different meanings, and you can express it with get, and it's so easy. It's easy to pronounce, it's easy to say. And I also think it adds a little bit of colour to the English language as well. And it's nice. It's a distinguishing feature. Okay, so the primary meaning of the word get.
Did I used to smile more? This guy's smiling a lot.
I think most people should already know, especially if you're B2, and that is to get, as in get the pen, right? It's like coger in Spanish. Most people will know that meaning, right? Another meaning of the word get, which is used very often, is to understand. Do you get it? Yeah, I get it. I get it. Do you get it? Yeah, I get it. And actually, as an English speaker, I rarely use the word to understand. In fact, I only use the word to understand really in English classes when I'm giving lessons to B1 and A2 students and I'm saying, does everyone understand? But if I'm speaking to my friends, really, I'm just going to say, do you get it? Yeah, I get it. Do you get it? Do you get what I'm talking?
Do you get it? He's a little bit camp, don't you think? See, he seems a little bit like he should be doing Carry On or something. I don't know. This guy. I don't think I would like this guy if I met him. That's cruel to myself. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, younger Rich. You have much to learn, young apprentice. But okay. Anyway, you can go watch that video. It's still relevant. It'll tell you all about how to use the word get. And yeah, it's good. So check it out. Next question. Got my car stolen, etc. Yeah, we talked about that, Dan. Thanks. Okay, Sahil still saying that. Alexander says, I'm doing intermittent fasting. Postpone my breakfast till 11. Great. I got some friends who love that stuff. Wow, I only just got to that. Are you talking about causative structure, Dan? Yeah. So where are you actually from? So I was born in a little cargo port called Runcorn. You want to see it? Little cargo town. That's Runcorn. So I was born here. And if you imagine England is, well, this map will be horrible, okay? But something like this. Okay. Okay. So imagine this is like the northwest of England, and right here you got Liverpool. Okay? And if you know your geography, then you will know that this is the Irish Sea / the Atlantic Ocean. And this, do you know what this is? It's a river. It's called the River Mersey. The River Mersey is a big river that runs through England here by Liverpool. And Runcorn is here. On the river. Now, the reason why Runcorn was quite a big town is because in the Industrial Revolution, it became a center for the chemical industry in the area, because the canal boats would go along the river to Runcorn and go to Liverpool, and then they'd go on the big boat, and the big boat goes to Europe or the United States, right? So that's why Runcorn's a big town. Now, I only found out recently that Runcorn actually has a history before this industrial time. Actually, Runcorn is a very, very old town. It's from the days of the Vikings, and it was a Viking settlement called Runkampf. Runkampf. Can you believe it? It was a little Danish town in the time of Alfred the Great. So it's almost 2,000 years old. But I don't think there's much of that around today. If you go to Runcorn today, you can see the industrial history. But if you go back a long time, then you'll get that. So that's where I'm from. But I left that place when I was 18, and I've never lived there since. But yeah, that's where I'm from. If you watch the wonderful TV show, The Last Kingdom, in season 3, the main character, Uhtred, son of Uhtred, goes and lives in Runcorn for a bit. And that's how I found out that it's a Viking settlement, because it was on the program. Because, you know, we didn't learn in Runcorn anything about that. We only learn about the industrial history. So, it's quite interesting. In Russian culture, there are 2 types of mind, technical and humanitarian. Do you agree with this classification? Do you think that humanitarian type is better for language learning? I don't really know anything about that classification, so I can't really comment on it. I think probably that's an oversimplification and that there's more to it than that. And I think that whatever your background and whatever skills you have already developed, you can still learn a language. But whether certain things set you up to learn a language better or not, yeah, probably. Like people who like sing, for example, tend to be better at pronunciation. If you're a singer, or a voice actor, or a musician. Like, these things can help with pronunciation and stuff like that. Because there are related skills that we develop, obviously. Free from K says, I've had raspberry and cranberry, and there's another berry called blueberry, which is super delicious. Fantastic. That is the classic response. Pallavi says, I get it, to my video about the meanings of get. Did you get it? Yeah, I get it. You know what I find so interesting about that is whenever I think about that video and the early videos I did on the channel, I always think that, like, I always started with, hey, everybody, it's Professor Rich. But you notice I don't. And I find that quite strange when I hear it and he says, hello, everyone, it's Rich, the English teacher. Did I ever say that? I thought I always said Professor Rich. So I find it weird. I don't know when I started saying Professor Rich. You'd have to go through the videos, go through the old videos and find out when I started saying it. But I thought I always said it. But one thing I always used to do is I always just say catch you later at the end. People used to love that. I don't know why. But I used to get, because when my YouTube channel first started, it became very popular in Valencia in Spain, which is where I lived. And I had people in Valencia who would stop me on the street and say, hey, you're that English teacher guy. I was like, oh, yeah. And they'd always be like, catch you later. Ha, ha, ha. They love that. That's funny. Funny what people pick up on, isn't it? Has anyone ever proposed renaming the Irish Sea to the British Sea? I don't think that would go very well. See, the thing is, Alex, you only do something like that if you want to annoy someone. And the British don't want to annoy the Irish. At all. I think ever since Cromwell, we've had a very, I'd almost say timid relationship with the Irish. Bear in mind, by the way, that by ancestry, I am Irish. I'm very Irish on both sides of my family. So my grandfather on my dad's side, my grandmother on my mum's side, and my grandfather on my mum's side is like half from Scotland, half from Ireland. So there's a lot of Irish. The majority is Irish. So, you know, there's the ancestry there, and I love the Irish. I love Irish people, but just speaking like historically and politically and so on, I think the British have been for probably at least 60 years. The British have had like this kind of attitude to the Irish. You know, okay, yeah, all right, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. That sort of thing. So I don't think they would definitely never do anything like that. Yeah. I think everyone's a bit embarrassed about some of the atrocities that were committed by the Brits in Ireland. Much more than elsewhere, by the way. Maybe because they're so close. I don't know. But they're so like us as well. You know, I say as someone who is, you know, genetically Irish. But I mean, like culturally, the Irish and the English are really similar. You know, the Irish might be kind of embarrassed to think of it like that, but we are. You know, we're super similar. I mean, if I went to like Mexico and then I bump into an Irish person, it's like I've met a friend, you know? Immediately, it's a friend. And like much more so than an American even. And with an American, you meet a friend. Hey, buddy, how's it going? Whatever, burgers and stuff. But if you meet an Irish person, it's like that's a close friend, you know? It's like, hey, it's an Irish guy. That's great. I love Irish guys, you know? So, yeah. Anyway. Vitaly says, hi, Rich. I'm late to the party. Another one with gets. You don't get to tell me what to do. Yes, you don't get to do something, which means have the ability or have the permission to do something. Indeed. All right, that's it. Oh, final thing, Alex, final comments. I heard there's a big difference between musical hearing ability and another language speaking ability. Is another friend of mine is a professional speaker, still speaks with an accent. There is, but there's a crossover. Because you still have, it's the point of there are, like, skills have domains. And those domains have crossovers. However, just because there's a crossover, you still need to actually try to improve the domain of the specific skill. And also, it's more complicated than that because it's not just about singing, but it's the question of what kind of singing, you know? So if we think, for example, Alex, about music, and we said like, okay, we've got a jazz guitarist, and this jazz guitarist is now going to learn rock guitar, and we compare that to like a classical cellist learning to play rock guitar. Well, the classical cellist will have some some overlap with rock guitar, but the jazz guitarist will have a lot more. They both still need to learn the skill of rock guitar, but there's more of an overlap. So yeah, it's not going to make you necessarily very good at it, but it's better than coming from zero. Like, I have never, ever, ever touched a musical instrument and now I need to learn rock guitar versus I'm a master cellist and I'm going to learn rock guitar. Like, definitely you have an advantage as a master cellist. But of course, there's other things that you have to take into account as well. Motivation, emotion, the age of the student. Like, if the master cellist is 75 years old, but the person who's learning rock guitar new is like 12, then, you know, that makes a difference as well. So I'm just saying, all other things being equal, there are overlaps in skills. And musical ear is definitely an advantage. So if you have some musical ability, it does help. But I'm definitely not saying that it's worth going out and like learning to play piano to improve your English, right? But I'm just saying, you know, there is an overlap. It also, you know, if you're a master musician, it doesn't mean you're going to be great at things with languages. But you will definitely have a more developed ear. And developing your ear is definitely part of learning languages, particularly when it comes to comprehension and pronunciation. And for many people, it's very difficult. And, you know, for musicians and non-musicians. But if you're a musician, it helps. To be honest, though, I have to admit, I'm going to be honest here, Alex. I'm speaking mainly from my own anecdotal experience because I am a musician and I know that I have developed my ear, and then I became a language teacher and I developed it further, and I sort of understand that process, how it's happened in me. So it is very anecdotal what I'm saying. It's not based on, I can't say that it's necessarily true, but from my experience, it's true. Get to also means have an opportunity to do something. Yes, that's much better, Dan. That's better than my definition. Good job. All right, everybody, thank you very much for watching me today. My name has been Professor Rich. Make sure you do smash that like button, hit subscribe. I hope you've had a lovely stream. I hope it's been very helpful and informative to you. Have a lovely weekend. Have a lovely week. And I will catch you next time. See you later, folks. Bye-bye.